Blizzard have broken their game again. Today I'm going to cover a way on how to fix your queues, as well as go over a few class tuning changes that are coming out today for the US people and tomorrow for the EU people. If this video helps you, be sure to drop a like, comment, and subscribe, and enjoy the video. Now, for most people, I've logged on this morning and I've opened up my group finder, and as you can see here, the arena feature becomes available at max level. I'm already max level, I'm level 80, so there's a quick fix for this. Someone had posted on the forums this link here because there's a bug at the moment with arenas being locked out. This has been confirmed by customer support Blizzard staff who have seen that there's a workaround around it, and because of this bug, people are going to have to put this into their chat to be able to unlock the queues. So as you can see, it's unavailable currently. I'm now going to open up the chat and I'm going to paste this in here. Instantly, it becomes clickable, and then you can finally queue for your games. Even though it's grayed out, you can still queue. As you can see here, I'm joining these games and whatnot, so it works. I'm going to be going over these class tuning changes very quickly. The Sand Lane talents are buffed with increased damage and disease effectiveness. Now, looking at Havoc Demon Hunter here, it seems that we have major buffs going to the Aldrachic Reaver talent with massive increases to Wounded Quarry and Warblade's Hunger. Moving over to Vengeance Demon Hunter, we have increased Mastery and Soul Barrier Absorption for more tankiness. Now, as it seems here with Feral Druid, we have small buffs to multi-target bleeds and bursting growth. Restoration Druid seems that it's got a 5% healing all round, but it doesn't affect PvP combat. But Cenarian Ward healing is increased by 40%, which is quite big. Over to Augmentation Evoker, armor sharing with Blistering Scales seems to have been nerfed. Flame Shaper damage has been nerfed, as you can tell by the engulf damage reduced by 20% in PvP, but Flame Shaper Preservation has been buffed. As for the BM Hunter, it seems that they have fixed the AoE damage issues, but they have also increased the damage by 8% for both you and your pet. Over to Survival Hunter, as we can see here, there has been a buff for both Wildfire Bomb and Raptor Strikes. Over to Frost Mages, we can see there has been a lot of big damage increases over the Frostfire Bolt and Infusion lately, so this is going to be a big difference when you're playing against Frost Mages or if you're playing Frost Mage yourself. As for Monks, we can see that Celestial of the Conduit now scales with Mastery, and that we're also getting a aspect of the Harmony change to healing effectiveness, which is compensating for a bug that had happened. So there was going to be a nerf for Holy Paladins that's coming up at the moment, which was going to be a 5% reduced healing for PvP combat, but lately they've reverted it and they've actually increased some yard changes and some healing effectiveness changes for the rest of their abilities. As for Protection and Retribution, there has been some ability damage and healing buffs with various talent improvements. Shadow Priest is getting a huge buff, and that is mostly 10% buffs to core damage abilities like Mind Blast, Void Bolt, and Shadowy Apparitions. As for Assassination Robe, the buffed Vile Tinker now affects more abilities, and for Outlaw and Sub, it seems that there has been another increase in damage buff across all ability damage and Black Powder damage for Sub Robe by 35%. Earthen Harmony now causes Earthshield to reduce damage taken by 3%. It was 5%, but it doesn't work in PvP, so it's pretty much 5% in PvP still, and Acid Rain has also been reduced by 20%. As for Demonology, we're going to see stronger Doom Guards and Fel Guards with a 10 to 20% increase in damage. Now, the changes on Warrior are quite big, so I'm going to just summarize this very quickly. So it seems that we're getting Arterial Bleed, which causes Colossal Mark to increase the damage by Deep Runes, and Rend by 3% per stack. It was 2% before, so we're getting a 1% buff there. No Stranger to Pain increases total damage ignored by 20%. It was 15 before. Lightning Strikes is up by 25%. Mountain Thane's current ground damage is increased by 25%. Thorim's Might causes Lightning Strikes to generate 3 rage instead of 5, and Thorim's Might increases Revenge, Raging Blow, and Execute damage by 25%, which was 15, so that's a 10% buff right there as well. As for the Slayer, the Culling Cyclone bonus Blade Storm damage reduced to 10% was 20%, as well as Opportunist now increases the damage and critical strike damage of your next Overpower or Raging Blow by 20% was 30%. So as you can see here, we've seen another 10% nerf. As for Fury, there's been some changes in the set piece bonuses, but it doesn't affect PvP, so I'm not going to go over that. Crushing Thunder now causes Thunderclap to generate 8 rage. It was 5 before, and the Strength of the Mountain increases Bloodthirst and Rampage damage done by 30% was 20%, so another 10% buff there. As for the Prot Warriors, Thunder Blast now generates 8 rage. It was 10 before. Now over to the PvP exclusive changes. As you can see, Death Cold damage has been reduced by 15% in PvP combat, Virulent Plague damage reduced by 15%, Frost Fever damage reduced by 15%, and Blood Plague damage reduced by 15% for Unholy DK. So Unholy DKs are seeing a 15% overall damage reduction on their class at the moment. Over to Havoc Demon Hunters, who have been performing very poorly recently, are now getting a 4% damage buff on all their abilities in PvP combat, as well as Immolation Aura damage increased by 13.6% in PvP combat. I don't know why it's 13.6, but they've decided to do 13.6. As for Feral Druids, Ferocious Wound, which is the PvP talent, now decreases maximum health by 3% per stack. It was 5 before, so there's a 2% nerf there. Tranquility Healing for Restorations is now increased by 30% in PvP combat, and Mana Regeneration for Restoration Druids is now reduced by 40% in PvP combat. It was 50% before, so there's a 10% nerf on the Mana Regeneration for Restoration Druids, which they might actually start feeling. Hunter, Survival of the Fittest now provides 25% damage reduction in PvP combat. It was 30% before, so now there's a 5% nerf on Survival of the Fittest. Survival Tactics, which is a PvP talent, now has a 2-second duration. Before it was a 3-second duration. Smokescreen now applies Survival of the Fittest at 50% effectiveness in PvP combat, as well as Sentinel, Don't Look Back, effectiveness reduced by 50% in PvP combat too. As for mages at the moment, we got Frigid Winds is now 50% effective in PvP combat, which is going to be a bit annoying. As for Arcanes, Arcane Missile damage increased by 35% in combat, so it's 15% buff as it was 20% before, and Arcane Orb damage increased by 40% in PvP combat. There's a 10% buff on Arcane Orb for Arcane Mages too. As for Fire Mages, which have been really underperforming lately, Pyroblast damage increased by 20%, Fireball damage increased by 150%, so it's a 50% buff from the 100, Scorch damage increased by 300% in PvP, which was 200% before, so that's 100% increased damage on Scorch. Ignite damage increased by 15% in PvP combat. World in Flames, which is the PvP talent, now increases Flame Strike damage by up to 50%, which was 100% before, so that's a nerf. And Glass Cannon now increases health by 30%, which was 15 before, so it's 15% increase in health, and increases the damage done by Scorch, Fireball, and Ignite by 20%, which was 30% before, so it's a 10% nerf on Scorch, Fireball, and Ignite when you got Glass Cannon. So we might be actually seeing a comeback of Fire Mages very, very soon. As for Shamans, Healing Stream Totem healing increased by 15% in PvP. Elementals, Lightning Bolt damage increased by 15%, Chain damage increased by 15%, and Tempest damage increased by 15% as well on Elementals, as they have been a bit underperforming, but now we're going to be seeing some big damage coming out of Elemental Shamans. As for the Restoration Shamans, they've actually got a bit of a buff on their healing. The Healing Wave for healing increased by 10% in PvP combat, and the Healing Surge healing is increased by 10% in PvP combat too. As for Warlocks, they've reduced the effectiveness of Demon Skin Armor, no longer reducing 50% in PvP combat, because before it did, now it doesn't. And Demonic Resilience now reduces the damage taken by your primary pet by an additional 67% in PvP combat. As for Affliction, Malevolent Visionary damage is reduced by 30%, Shadowbolt Volley damage reduced by 25% in PvP, Soul Harvester has been reduced by 20%, Soul Harvester Soul Anathema reduced by 20%, and Soul Harvester Demonic Soul has been reduced by 20% too. As for Demonology, the damage has been increased by 40% in PvP combat for their Demon Bolt. Over the Warriors, Defensive Stance now reduces damage taken by 15% in PvP combat. Before it was 10%, so they've given a 5% increase in defensive stance overall for all warriors at the moment. As for arms, Execute damage increased by 15%. Mortal Ceramic damage increased by 55% in PvP, which was 35 before, so it's a 20% increase in damage on Mortal Strike for arms. And Master's Commander now reduces the cooldown of Rallying Cry by 120 seconds, which was 90 seconds before, and increases its effectiveness by 10%, was 15. We've seen a nerf on Master and Commander. As for Prot Warriors, Execute damage is also increased by 15% in PvP combat. So if there's any crackheads out there that want to play Prot Warrior in PvP, you go for it. Now overall, I've gone and put a little summary together of everything that I've just gone over, just so you guys can follow through in case of those people that didn't want to see the entire video. So this is the summary of everything. As for Death Knights, we've got buffs to Bloodspec, minor PvP nerfs. As for Demon Hunter, we've got buffs to Havoc and Vengeance Demon Hunters. There's been a big PvP buff to boosting Havoc Demon Hunters. As for Druids, we've got buffs to Feral AoE and Restoration Healing, but the PvP mana regen has been improved because obviously they had a bit more mana regen than most classes, so they've reduced it a tiny bit. For the Evoker, we've got mixed adjustment across all specs. As for Hunters, we've got BM and Survival Hunter buffs, and there's been a few PvP adjustments. As for Mages, we've got Frostfire buffs, and Fire Mages have had a PvP damage increase buff, but the Glass Cannon has been nerfed. As for Monks, we've got Master and Harmony buffs, and there's been some minor PvP changes. For Paladins, we've got Retribution and Prop Pally buffs, but the healing has been reduced slightly, but not for PvP. As for Priests, we've seen an all-round shadow damage buff. For Rogues, we've got Outlaw and Sub-Rogue buffs. For Assassination has had some PvP tweaking. For Shaman, we've got buffs to PvP healing and elemental damage. For Warlocks, we've got PvP nerfs for Affliction, buffs for Demonology, and for Warriors, we've seen PvP damage and defensive buffs across specs. So there's been that increase in defensive stance by 5% as well as that we've seen some buffs in the Arms Warrior. So that pretty much covers everything for the talent class changes that are coming out soon. If you have enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you are new here, as I do make these videos quite often and I can give you these updates whenever you guys want them. Leave down some comments down below discussing the changes that you have seen today, and I'll catch you all in the next video.